Hello, friends. Good morning and welcome. Welcome, Lou.
How are we doing today?
We are excited. I'm excited because today we're going to be starting on chapter 15. Chapter 15 in the Bhagavad Gita is a very important chapter, a very dense chapter. It only has 20 verses. It's the shortest chapter in the Gita,
Hmm.
but probably the hardest to get a handle on, if you can believe that. So this is not, as they say when you're watching a movie, this is not for the faint-hearted. Meaning, it's pretty dense. It's pretty. You need to wrap your hands around this. You have to wrap your intellect around this. It's not easy to comprehend, but if you're in for it, then this is going to be very, very helpful because it's basically almost it's basically taken from the Upanishads, and the Upanishads were written many thousands of years before the Gita, which was written. The Gita was 3,000 years BCE. Number one, and the Upanishads were many years even before the Gita. So the Katha Upanishad talks about an upside down tree, if you can believe it. So this chapter 15 starts off, verse 1, with an upside down tree with the roots up, and then comes the trunk, and then all the branches, and the buds, and the leaves. And it was all pretty symbolic because what Krishna has been saying all along, right, Lou? Krishna
Yes.
said that it is Purusha and Prakriti, or spirit and matter together. He says Brahman, Atman joins together with matter, and that produces a jiva, or a living entity. All along, we've been talking about it in that sense. This time, for the first time, the Upanishads, the Gita, basically turn it around, where the new metaphor is that of an upside down tree, where the main root, which is all the way on top, is Brahman. And the secondary roots that come from it are the vasanas and desires. The trunk is all of the various beings and everything else that exist in this world and the world itself. The branches represent all of our activities that come from our vasanas, which are the secondary and tertiary roots. The buds represent sense objects, and the leaves all represent the Vedas or knowledge. So, as I said, dis- full disclosure, this is a very heavy, scientifically uh, difficult chapter to comprehend. But if you're up for it, it is extremely rewarding. So, bear with me, you'll find this quite interesting. So, we have heard through the Christian religion the Trinity, right?
Yes.
The Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Now, this Trinity appears not just in the Christian religion, but in many other religions. And this Upanishads, which talked about this many thousands of years ago, also refers to a Trinity. The Trinity here, and this is why it's so important, is the Kshara, Kshara, which is perishable, which we recognize as the Son, Son, like son, daughter. Akshara, meaning imperishable, or the Holy Ghost, and the Uttam Purusha, which means the supreme being, also known as the Father. So bear with me. I will go through this one at a time. This chapter is called the Yoga of the Supreme Being. This chapter is called the Yoga of the Supreme Being. All along, we've been talking about Brahman and the self, and when Brahman comes into our bodies with the Atman. But what he's talking about here is beyond ourselves, the microcosm. So Krishna talks about the macrocosm, which is this entire universe. And then he talks about the microcosm, which is us, all the individuals. And he says that the concept that is in the macrocosm, the whole universe, is the same as if it is in the microcosm. But even beyond all this, there's a supreme being. So if you were to look at the perishable, which is matter, body, the world, etc., that's perishable, all we consider. We've talked about this many times. If those of you who may not have heard chapter 13 or chapter 14, you should go back and revise this. Don't start with chapter 15, it's too hard. But we talked about matter being perishable. All of that is considered to be the sun. And we've talked about imperishable, which is the Atman within us, the Brahman, the life giving force. That is known as the Akshara, imperishable, or in the Christian religion, that would be considered the Holy Ghost. And beyond this is the Uttam Purusha, the Supreme Being, or the Father. That's the Supreme Being. How does that work? As an example, because it's becoming a little too difficult, right, for people to understand. So if I were to go to a big farm, and I think I've mentioned it a million times already, how my mother told me that God exists in everything, everything. You look around and God exists in everything when I was a little child. If you go to a farm and a little boy asks you, where's God? And you say, like my mother told me, it says, God is everywhere. So the child goes away with thinking, oh, the God is in these cows and these sheep and these pigs and these horses and also in all of these farm buildings, right? Well, then the mother says, well, God is also within you. And that's the microcosm. He says, okay, so God is in me and God is in all of these other entities that we spoke about. So he says, what about the universe? And his mother says, okay, universe is all part of this macrocosm. The planets, everything around you, as far as you know, is all Brahman. So the child thinks, well, Brahman exists in the universe. The whole universe exists inside Brahman. The second statement is true. The whole universe, everything, the macrocosm, is just one tiny little dot inside Brahman. Brahman is much, much, much greater than even the universe. The analogy is also that taken of that of a dream, where you say, my God, I had such a long dream. It was so detailed, so intense. Where did it begin? Where did it end? Where did it come from? Just like we say about the universe. And you say, well, the dream is just one small fraction of the mind from which this dream came. You started dreaming, you don't know when. It dream ended when you woke up, but that dream, compared to everything else in your mind, is just one small drop, correct? That is exactly how the universe is in the Brahman. And that the rest of this is called the Supreme Being. So you have to envision that Brahman within us, everything is the microcosm, within every little insect, bee, etc. And everything else is the macrocosm, and beyond that is the Supreme Being. So Brahman is imperishable. He is the essence of both the microcosm and the microcosm, but God, Brahman, is also beyond all of this and beyond the Kshara and the Akshara. So another example, there's plenty of examples in the scriptures, is that of gold ornaments and gold. If you say, well, gold ornament, you're looking at a gold tiara that you put on a crown, and you say, well, this is a nice crown. And you say, well, this is crown, is everything in it is gold. If you take it out, it's the gold that is in this ornament. But if you dissolve it, if you melt it, and it becomes gold again, gold doesn't change. The crown may change, the jewelry may change, but gold doesn't. A clay pot is made from clay. You recognize the clay, you recognize the pot, they're not different. They're the same, except that clay takes on the form of the pot. Little hard to understand for some people, but with practice, you can get there. Now, verse 1 talks of an upside down giant fig tree. Now, in India, they have these huge, huge, huge giant fig trees where riders used to tie their horses because that tree ain't going anywhere, as they say. It is so solid, it's huge, and it's there for generations, it's there forever. So it's a good analogy that the Upanishads picked for this verse 1 because it's huge. It's got branches, it's got leaves, it's got figs, it's got buds, it's got flowers, roots, etc. So when you talk about any corporation as this whole universe and everything about Brahman is, the top, if you see Jeff Bezos as the CEO and chairman of Amazon, he's all the way at the top. Then comes everything below him.
Mhm.
Jeff Bezos is not put at the bottom of the field. He's always put at the top. So in this, Lord Krishna takes the Upanishads and instead of saying spirit and matter combined together, he draws it in a linear fashion. He puts Brahman at the top, and then from there comes the roots, the branches, etc. So it's a giant fig tree with roots above, branches below. The leaves are the hymns of Vedas. And he says, he who knows that gains the wisdom of the Vedas. What does this mean? He's basically saying that everything I said before, that Brahman is the main root. Because we are not aware of Brahman, what happens is we misapprehend, misrepresent, misconceive Brahman as other things. So when you see the universe, when you see Mars, when you see moon, you see the world, you misunderstand it, misapprehend it, and you think of this as the world. You think of this as another human being, a dog, an elephant, but it's still Brahman. But you don't see it as Brahman. You misapprehend it because you don't see it as Brahman. You don't understand it. Those misunderstandings, misapprehensions are known as vasanas. Those vasanas then come out as a thought that you want to get from the world. You want to get something. That thought then becomes another thought becomes a stream of thoughts, which is known as attachment. These are words that keep coming up all the time.
Right.
Those attachments are multiple thoughts towards getting something. Those attachments become wider and wider and becomes a big stream of thoughts. That becomes a desire. That desire becomes an obsession and you want to get that. Those are vasanas which have now become desires after becoming thoughts, and then you want it. Those are all coming from the one facet that you don't understand Brahman. So, common example in the scriptures is that of the rope that you see in the twilight. You don't recognize it as a rope, therefore you see it as a snake. Because you don't recognize it as a rope, you see it as a snake. You look at the snake and you have all kinds of feelings towards it. You wouldn't necessarily have those feelings towards the rope, but you say, oh, I'm scared of that snake. Oh, what a beautiful snake it is. It's black with diamonds, gold diamonds on it, on its back. Ooh, look at it. It looks so curly. It's so smooth. All kinds of thoughts. You give it attributed, you give attributed to it different qualities that are not there. You're putting those attributes onto it. You say, where did this snake begin? You don't know because it was your imagination. The rope was there already. You don't know where that rope began, that snake began. You don't know what the story is for the snake, where it's going, where it's coming. You don't know where it ends because it's all in your imagination. When you see the rope, then the snake disappears. Not only does it disappear, it never comes back. This is all very important because it's the same thing as recognizing Brahman. Once you see the rope and you recognize it's not a snake, you can never go back to looking at that snake, that rope, and seeing it as a snake again. Even if you put it back down where it was in that dark, you still see it as a rope.
Mhm.
Similarly, once you see Brahman, once you are one with Brahman, once you recognize Brahman, you can never go back. Any place else you go, you take a trip, you go there, you come back. Anything else, you go up, you can either come back down or you can go up higher. But once you cross the road to recognizing Brahman as Brahman, you don't come back. You can't come back. This endless cycle of births and deaths is over once and for all. So what he says is that this tree is representative of the world. The Ashwata tree, that's what this is called, this giant fig tree. This Ashwata tree is ever changing. It is never the same. From day to day, it changes, obviously, because some leaves fall down, some new leaves come about, some buds come, some flowers come. And year after year, generation after generation, it's there for, it looks as if it's been there forever. Nobody has ever seen it being born. Nobody's ever seen it going die. So it is analogous to the world. People think, oh, if I go back so many millions of years, I will know the beginning of this world. No, you don't know what the beginning of the world. You don't know where it came from. You only know what you think you know, and you don't know where it'll end. So it appears as if it's everlasting. But the Ashwata tree also appears as if it's everlasting, but it's really not. Neither is the tree everlasting because it does die, it did get born, nor is this earth, this world, this universe everlasting. You didn't see it get born, you won't see it when it dies, but it will. It will. It is part of Prakriti, it is part of matter. It is part of that which is destructible, perishable. It is part of Kshetra. Why is this important? Because it basically explains, and you'll see in the next 19 verses, heavy, heavy, heavy verses, that you will see how you understand all of this. So the entire creation comes from Brahman, so he's at the top. The branches represent all the activities of this world. The leaves represent knowledge, and there's different kinds of knowledge, different kinds of awareness, different kinds of consciousness. That's what he's talking about in the Vedas. Different kinds of awareness all come from pure awareness. Different kinds of consciousness, which we know, that all come from pure consciousness. The world is changing constantly. We are changing constantly. So is the Ashwata tree, but it seems to be imperishable like the world is. Now, one of the things that I found interesting, that you might also, is that the buds are sense objects. So you say, why are buds considered sense objects? I don't understand that. I didn't understand it when I first saw it. Why did the scriptures so intelligently produce buds as sense objects? Because what are buds? From a bud, if you know, comes a flower. That's an orchid tree behind me. I don't know if there are still buds on it. No,
Yes.
there aren't. They've all come into flowers. That's not artificial, by the way. It's real. So there are buds. At some point, it comes into a flower, and from the flower becomes a fruit, and from the fruit comes other things. So why are sense objects considered buds? Because after all, what is a sense object? Anything that you crave. You crave things by your five senses. You crave food, for instance. You crave a person of the opposite sex, for instance. You crave nice smelling things, all of these things. Now, why are they considered buds? Imagine as you're listening to this, I ask you, were you thinking about chocolate right now? If you like chocolate. And you may say, no, I was concentrating on what you were saying. So you weren't thinking of chocolates, right? There was no thought of a desire, therefore there was no desire, no thought of a chocolate, so therefore there was no desire for a chocolate. But if you're fond of chocolates, which are the sense objects, and I come while you're listening to this and I put a nice piece of Dove chocolate in front of you, what happens? Your mind is now torn. It's going back and forth between looking at the chocolate and listening to me, looking at the chocolate. And the thought is occurring to you, can I pop that in my mouth? Can I eat it? Now, that sense object has produced, that bud has produced a flower of desire within you. And it is going to keep bugging you until you eat it, right? So that bud of the sense object brought about the desire in you. For another example, these are COVID times, and when you want to go eat Chinese food, for instance, or any food from a restaurant, you don't sit in the restaurant and eat it. You go there, you pick it up, and you bring it back home, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So the other day, my wife said she wanted to eat Chinese food. She says, what do you want? And I said, I really have no appetite at all. She said, okay, let's go pick up XYZ, which she likes and she knows I like. I said, fine, I'll pick it up, but I'm really not hungry. And she says, you watch. You watch. The minute you get it and you put it in the car to bring it back, the smell of your favorite Chinese dishes will tantalize you enough to produce in you the desire to eat it. I said, I have no appetite. I don't feel like eating it. And she says, we'll see. So I went, I picked up the Chinese food, and true to her word, I put it in the car, and this beautiful smell of what I like started coming up through my nostrils. And I said, she said it. And I'm going to be talking about chapter 15 and the sense buds, and it's so true. And I said, but I'm not going to eat it. I don't feel tempted just with the smell, right?
Yep.
Now comes the other senses of sight and taste. So we put it on the table in a nice dish, served it, steaming hot still. And now not only the smell, but the sight and the potential taste of it are tantalizing my mind, which has the memory of having eaten that before. And my stomach is growling with hunger for it.
Yep.
So what has happened? The sense object produced in me a desire that wasn't there before, but was written in my memory, in my chitta, in my vrittis were the memories of this Chinese food, and I started to eat it. So these buds are known as sense objects. These sense objects are known as buds in this particular analogy. I could keep going on, but I know time is short. And I want to talk about one particular thing that is very important. And that is that when you have these kind of desires and thoughts and cravings for different things, you need to control them. How to control them? Now, in the Ramayana, Lou, you probably don't know this. Most people who don't know the Ramayana don't know this. Rama was a godly prince, somebody who was self realized. And he was fighting a monkey prince, a monkey king, whose name was Vali.
Hmm.
Vali was a very evil king. He did a lot of bad things, including his brother's wife, other kinds of. Vali represented lust, cravings, and desires. Bad guy. So he had a boon because, in addition to being a bad guy, he was also very devout and prayed, and he was given a boon, a blessing by gods, that if he were to ever fight anybody face to face, his enemy's strength, 50% of it would come to Vali immediately as he faced that warrior. So assume that Vali was on his deathbed, but he wasn't completely dead. He only had 1% strength left in his body. And he's fighting somebody who's got 100% strength. What happens? 50% of his enemy's strength comes to Vali. So it goes from 1% to 51%. And the other guy's left with 50%. So he's winning. Vali gets 51%, the other guy gets 50. So no matter who he battles, he's always going to take away that person's half his strength. He's weakened immediately upon facing Vali face to face.
Yeah.
So what the scriptures recognize is that these are addictions. These are lusts. Vali represents your and my lust, your desire, your temptation, uncontrollable kinds of things that are addictions. So Ram, when he has to kill Vali, symbolically hides behind a tree and goes behind Vali and shoots him with an arrow from behind and kills him. So people misunderstand this and they say, that's cowardice. How did you kill something from behind with an arrow? How did you kill an enemy? That's cowardice.
Yeah.
But if you look at it at the face value, it appears that way. But really, what it is telling us is that when you have an addiction, you don't face it face to face. Half your strength is going to go just when you face the addiction. For example, an alcoholic goes into a bar, he's facing his temptations front on. It's going to be very difficult. His buddies are sitting around the table, they're laughing, they're joking, they each have a glass of beer in front of them, and they say, hey, sit down, have a beer. And he says, no, I'm fighting this. You are not, you can't, because 50% of your strength has gone already. You're weakened just by entering into that bar and sitting down with your friends. 50% of your strength is gone. It's going to take a lot to be able to control it. Had you never gone into that bar, had you never gone near your friends, you would have had all your strength. So
your addiction is enlisting your sense organs. to fight
Yes,
against you.
yes. So
Yeah.
that's why this whole thing about the bud, this buds of the tree. So this Rama fighting Bali is an important part of this analogy, and that sense buds that we are talking about here in verse number 1 is also very important for us to keep in control. It also says that you should control your senses a little bit at a time. You'll see as we go further, we're talking about detachment. Detachment is also not something where you stop completely cold turkey. It's easier for you to give it up a little bit at a time. We'll talk about that when we talk about viveka and vairagya.
This reminds me of the marshmallow experiment that we've talked about a couple times, where kids resisted eating the marshmallows. The ones who were successful didn't look at it, just kind of turned their attention away from it.
That's right. That's right. So if I went to pick up the Chinese food with like a clothes hanger on my nose and I didn't smell it and I had a blindfold on my eye, maybe it would have been different. I wouldn't
Put
have
it in the trunk, Sherrod. Put the Chinese food in the trunk.
True. All right. So that's verse 1, and we will continue with verse 2 next time. Anything to add, Lou?
Oh, fascinating. I'm so excited for this now because it's a really interesting concept, and we're presented the basics of it and I can see it. I just want to get into it more deeply, which I'm sure the chapter will do. So I'm looking forward to this.
Yes. All right, friends. Thank you very much. I look forward to hearing from you with your questions, and hopefully we'll be able to answer them. So we'll see you next time. Thank you.